That's Debatable is sponsored by MB&G. MB&G are specialists in the esoteric world of vehicle and furniture warranty insurance, delivering quite marvellous customer service, prompt claims payment, and a highly developed understanding of how to deliver these products in a way that is both compliant with the regulations and attractive to customers. To find out more, call Paul Smith, the Managing Director, on 07887 501 441. That's 07887 501 441. Hello and welcome to That's Debatable, the weekly news podcast of the Free Speech Union. And here we are in 2025. Welcome back to all of our listeners and to our viewers, and Happy New Year to you. I was thinking, Jan, I didn't realise it. We are now at the beginning of the second half of the first half of the 21st century. That's my sort of mathematical take on this new year. But then you get into this argument as to whether 2000 or 2001 was the beginning of the 21st century. And I remember having that argument 25 years ago. I'm not going to have that argument again. As far as I'm concerned, when it clocked over to 2000, that was the beginning of the century and the millennium. But it's quite a significant number, certainly, I think.
Well,
but
thankfully the world's calmed down over Christmas, hasn't it?
What's calmed down over Christmas?
The world has calmed down and we're all back to normal and as it should be.
It doesn't feel like the world's calmed down,
joking.
Jan. I can't pick up your sarcasm there, but yeah, it's gone nuts. I mean, you were on TV last night, weren't you? Should we start by talking about your TV appearance last night?
Yeah, Sunday night.
Sunday.
Yeah, Sunday. I was on Free Speech Nation on GB News with Josh Howie. And that was because Tuesday, the 7th of January, is the 10th anniversary of the Charlie Hebdo massacre in Paris, during which 12 people were murdered, 8 of them cartoonists for the Charlie Hebdo magazine, 11 people injured. Just the most shocking, the first of the most shocking Paris attacks, I suppose, but so directly about free speech, so direct that it's really worth us thinking about, talking about, and then marking. So there will be a vigil on Tuesday, which will have taken place by the time this goes out, at 10:15 in Trafalgar Square by Nelson's Column. A group of people, anybody can turn up, but hopefully that will have been well attended, and there'll be speeches and people with the Je suis Charlie. Now more than ever, it's incredibly important that we mark this 10-year anniversary. And I was there was an interview with the current editor-in-chief of Charlie Hebdo. So Charlie Hebdo is a weekly satirical magazine in France that was launched in the 60s, was dormant for a while and then resurrected in the early 90s. And it's become known as this in France. It really was an institution. And one of my closest friends is a Parisian who says that everybody knew all of those cartoonists who were killed. And one of the guys, I think his name is Kabi, or his nickname was Kabi, was on children's television as a cartoonist. So they weren't just kind of satirists in a little bunker somewhere knocking out outrageous content. They were kind of very well-known figures and well respected and understood in France in a way that I don't think they've been understood elsewhere. So this was a magazine that was deeply satirical in the kind of almost established or took forward the tradition of satire with these incredibly brutal cartoons. I didn't start subscribing until after the massacre. So my very close friend bought me a subscription after the massacre. And it was shocking to British sensibilities. It's so shocking because they're incredibly vulgar cartoons. They will take aim at anybody. Anyway, so 10 years ago on Tuesday, 2 gunmen opened fire in the offices of Charlie Hebdo, an editorial meeting, and killed 8 cartoonists and 12 people in total. They also killed a police officer, a man on reception, just absolutely brutal. And they did it in the name of Islam, in the name of protecting Muhammad, so they said. Although what the editor-in-chief of Charlie Hebdo says they didn't. They obviously weren't defending Muhammad. They were undermining and attacking the foundations of democracy. And I think that's the best way to understand it. So, and there was a huge rally a few days later in Paris. So 2 million people attended, 40 national leaders attended, including David Cameron, our Prime Minister. There was also a rally in Trafalgar Square in London with, I think, Nick Clegg attended, and a lot of other people. And the most sort of moving and commendable thing in my mind about this was that a week later, the remaining staff managed to bring out an edition of Charlie Hebdo, and I just think that's the most I find it very moving, actually, a really quite extraordinary thing. And that normally they would sell about 60,000 copies a week. They sold 8 million copies around the world. It was translated into 6 languages, whereas normally it would only be in French. So there was something of a recognition of the significance of this at the time. Islam was the second largest religion in France. The idea that it's powerless somehow, on a global scale, the idea that somehow this is punching down, which is what one of the American cartoonists, Gary Trudeau, very famous for the Doonesbury cartoons, he attacked or justified the attack on Charlie Hebdo by saying it was hate speech, that they were punching down, basically, by somehow attacking Islam. It's just, and that's a very unhelpful idea that's taken hold, which, some people have said that the war has not been won on this issue, and actually it's the terrorists who have won, because there's been a kind of internalized fatwa whereby people think nowadays, well, why would you mock Islam? And not because they think it's wrong necessarily, but because they think it's stupid, because they think it's too dangerous. And so and I remember even at the time, when I spoke to younger people after the attacks, they said, well, why would they do that? They would know. They must have known what would happen. Yeah,
and which is so topsy-turvy, isn't it? Why would you show these cartoons, given that you know that you're running a risk of an attack like this, instead of flipping it around and saying we live in a society where you can mock any set of ideas, and you should freely be able to mock any set of ideas, not, as you say, not a group of people, but a set of ideas. And this distinction has been lost. Mm-hmm. And they're saying, because of the consequences now of mocking a set of ideas, you shouldn't do that in the first place. It is logically incoherent. And what struck me as well, Jan, is the response at the time was pretty strong. The Je suis Charlie T-shirts, badges, leaflets, banners were everywhere. And yet, as you said last night on GB News, you said there were some mealy-mouthed responses even at the time. But it seems to me that 10 years later, would we have many more people being very mealy-mouthed and saying, well, you shouldn't have done it anyhow, which is anathema to freedom of expression, in my opinion. To say, well, you shouldn't have done it anyhow. You do what you like with a set of ideas, and the state should protect you from any repercussions, certainly any physical repercussions of that. But 10 years later, I feel that we wouldn't have even had that level of outrage that we had in 2015. And as you say, it was international.
Yeah, and the solidarity was weak. I mean, there was, as in real solidarity. So, coming out on the streets as world leaders, rubbing shoulders with each other in Paris, all well and good. But there was a number of newspapers in certain countries did reproduce the cartoons as an act of solidarity. Back in 2006, when the Danish cartoon controversy first came up. But others didn't. And, in Britain, it was noticeably absent.
It was absent. I remember the BBC saying they've made an editorial decision not to show the cartoons. And I think it was a foolish decision in light of of what happened and how soon after what happened and how brave Charlie Hebdo were to republish them. I remember Douglas Murray actually saying, do you think they should have done that? And he turned around and said, well, they had to. You have to. In the moment at which free expression is being targeted so sharply and so appallingly, you absolutely have to stand up for free expression in that moment. And so it was crazy that there were other places who said, no, we won't do it. But it's fear, it's cowardice, as you say, Jan.
And I think over the years that the idea of these cartoons has kind of acquired this real mystique where people haven't actually seen them. If you go and Google what were the cartoons, people would be surprised, I think. I think there were 12 cartoons originally published in a Danish newspaper. And I think people think they were just straightforwardly kind of abusive. They were, the most famous one is a picture of a bearded man's head, supposedly Muhammad, but obviously not an actual representation of him. It's a cartoon, but it's not a cartoon in the way that we might think in a comic sense. It's actually more like a line drawing, a kind of black and white sketch in some ways. And he's wearing a sort of turban type thing with a bomb fizzing in the turban, and obviously that's a satire on violence, religious violence, and Islamist violence. That wasn't a sort of abuse of all Muslims. That wasn't even necessarily about the faith, particularly, I suppose. But and I think people were really surprised that that is described even as a cartoon, actually. But because that's the word that's being used. When then Samuel Paty is murdered in 2020 in France for showing the cartoons to his class, I think the assumption is that somehow he was doing that in a kind of irreverent kind of way, whereas actually he's educating them in intolerance, but also in the discussion about what tolerance means in a liberal society. And then similarly with the Batley Grammar School, the teacher showed that cartoon to the pupils, not because he thought they would recoil in horror, because I don't think most people would. I mean, it's not like it's immediately offensive. But obviously, it is theoretically offensive to a Muslim, and it might be politically offensive if you don't like the association between Islam and violence being made. But nevertheless, it's fair comment, So I think it's worth us kind of really revisiting the whole episode, really.
And the trouble is, it entrenches this cowardice and this fear. Now, the thing about it is, it's understandable, Jan. When you see that there are people willing to go out and hurt people because of their showing the cartoons. The Batley Grammar School teacher, as we know, is still in hiding. But that cowardice is so endemic, and it really reminded me of that exchange in November 24, actually, so relatively recent, on GB News, where it was a Labour Party advisor called Mike Buckley, and he claimed not to have heard about the Batley Grammar School teacher who is still in hiding. More than 3 years later, he said, and then went on, when it was explained to him on that show, went on to say, well, it was a foolish thing to do in the first instance. He should have known that was the risk he was running, which again puts this upside down, cart before horse, or horse before cart before horse, as to where free expression fits against sort of being offended, and the fact no one actually has a right not to be offended. And yet, because the risk is so real, of course, whether you're a comedian, whether you're a satirist, whether you're a broadcaster, you're immensely cautious now. Is it cowardice, or is it just trying to save your skin? It's difficult to know at times, isn't it?
Yeah, well, we don't know, do we? When obviously you only need a few warning shots, literal warning shots, to be fired for everybody, for it then to seem like it's rational then to kind of save your own skin. But in so doing, you just expose even more the people who are still prepared to speak out. I think there was a point in something I was reading. I think it was a Douglas Murray piece about that. You leave exposed the newspapers who are prepared to publish the cartoons, the novelist who's prepared to carry on writing. We abandon them and make them even more of a target, because we can't all be targeted. And if we all were to robustly push back, then that would be a very powerful thing. I was reminded of our logo, actually, because as part of the Je suis Charlie response, that the fist and pencil logo was used by people, and I kind of thought, oh, it's so interesting, because sometimes our logo is quite controversial. People think they don't like the fist, or they think it's fascistic, or they think it's communist. It's like all views can be piled onto our logo, but actually there's a really important origin to it, which is the power of the pen or the pencil, and that idea that is an incredibly powerful thing that is about free speech in practice, and that's where it needs defending. We can all pay lip service to free speech, but what we have to do is defend it in practice.
And there's another element, Jan, which really struck me when we spoke with Bernie Spoforth last year, where we asked her, we said, what do you think about sort of standing out from the crowd and saying things that are brave in the current times? And she said, always count the cost. We live in a time where you've really got to count the cost. And that also reminds me of the Free Speech Union, in this case, not the logo, but the fact that we're a mass membership organization. Not all of us can be the activists. Not all of us can be the Harry Millers of the world or the Tobys of the world. But we can all play our small part. And that's why we all get together at the Free Speech Union to ensure that our rights are protected and upheld. So there's getting together, operating together, and thinking these things through together without all of us feeling that we have to be sort of heroic and in an uncomfortable way. That isn't what we're called to do. We're called to do what we can. And there are so many parallels there with the sort of idea in Christianity, actually, about the church having all the different parts of the body and all having different roles to play in the church. It's the same in an organization like ours. We all have slightly different roles to play. Yours is to go on to Free Speech Nation on Sunday and fly the banner for the Free Speech Union.
Yeah. Come for one, come for all was one of the slogans that I was reminded of as we were as I was looking to this, and that's a great one as well. That's the point of a union or any kind of collective organisation. Yeah.
Should we talk about Toby's latest piece in Spiked? He's appeared on the Spiked podcast actually this week. He's also written an important sort of turning the page of a new year. He's written an article about what are the main threats to free speech as we move into 2025. And it's a great article, well worth reading in full. And there's a risk that we sort of go through it now and it's a bit like a shopping list. But nevertheless, it is worth drawing out one or two of the strands that he points to is, can free speech survive Kier Starmer, is the title of the piece. And he starts with the Employment Rights Bill. This will almost certainly receive royal assent later this year. And the problem with the Employment Rights Bill is that it contains a clause that will extend employers' liability under the Equality Act to third-party harassment, i.e. the harassment of employees by customers and the like. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means that owners of pubs, bars, restaurants, hotels, sports, anywhere where you get crowds of people interacting with your employees, those venues will have a legal obligation to take all reasonable steps to protect their employees from harassment by anyone they come into contact with. And the problem, as Toby points out in the article, is that that's going to mean that employers are going to need to operate like the banter police. The example he always uses in a stadium context is if someone from the crowd shouts out to the linesman, "Are you blind?" or to the referee, "Are you blind?" Someone could take offense at that and complain about that, and then that football club or stadium or whoever's hosting that event could end up getting into trouble under the Employment Rights Bill. And we actually thought we'd got rid of it last year. This clause did make an appearance in the Worker Protection Bill, and we did. We got it stripped out of it then, but it's come right back in this new bill that's likely to receive royal assent this year. And while we're on football, Jan, I picked a football example. Do you want to talk about the football governance bill?
Yes, well, this is something we're going to be discussing in Manchester on the 1st of February. It's a Saturday night event. It should be a really, really good event. We've got Baroness Claire Fox speaking. So she's been very vocal in the House of Lords, raising the free speech dimensions of this football governance bill because it will bind clubs to the kind of values of EDI in a way, although many of them are voluntarily adopting those, it will bind all of them to it. And it will make much worse issues, for example, the case of Lindsay Smith, who will also be speaking at that event, who is the Newcastle United football fan, who has been banned from games by the football club that she has supported since forever because of her social media words. I mean, I don't think people really believe it. Whenever I say this to people, they don't really believe it. They think there must be something else. There must be something else to it. That was it. That is why she was investigated, and that is why she's been suspended. And she's incredible. So she's going to come and tell her story to the audience with Claire. And it will really explore what it is about football that has meant that it's become such almost like a kind of training ground, excuse the pun, for restrictions on free speech, all the way back to the way in which football fans' speech has been restricted over the years, what they can chant, what abuse that. I mean, if you go to a football match, it is just abusive. I mean, a lot of the wittiest songs are the rudest songs.
In a wonderful way, Jan. I
In a
think some of
wonderful
those
way.
chants
I
are so
love it.
clever.
I love the worst of the football songs. They're brilliant. But they have, over the last 25, 30 years, the kind of focus on hooligan behavior shifted to unruly words, and so it has become a site whereby a lot of these sort of free speech restrictions have been kind of played out and developed. And then of course you can move it into other places. I remember somebody saying a number of years ago in a debate about this, saying, well, a football pitch is a workplace like any other. And so footballers and fans need to be protected. So footballers need to be protected from the abuse of the crowd and all of this kind of thing. So you can see how this place that actually is a place of freedom becomes somewhere where we kind of practice cracking down on it. So I think it's going to be a really good debate. There's tickets available. If you go to our website, freespeechunion.org/events, people can find tickets to that.
The other one I wanted to mention, just looking down this list of items that Toby's drawn out, is the Home Secretary Yvette Cooper has said she wants to lower the threshold for the recording of non-crime hate incidents. And the reasoning for this is because of Islamophobia and anti-Semitism on the streets. And she's thinking that the solution to that, again, we seem to be the wrong solution to any problem that we have. The solution seems to be, let's stop our free speech. The solution is to lower the threshold for the recording of non-crime hate incidents. And of course, I hope that some pushback against this may have come as a result of the fallout in November and December of the end of 2024, when following the Alison Pearson debacle, where she was had Essex Police appearing on her doorstep on Remembrance Sunday, even though that wasn't directly an NCHI issue, it led to a lot of articles and a lot of press about this non-crime hate incident issue and how nuts it's got. Children getting NCHIs for saying ordinary things in the playground, very innocuous, very vanilla things, very everyday things being said and labeled non-crime hate incidents. And it kind of uncovered the horror of these because they have real life consequences. It means you can't get a job. It means you've got a little black mark against your record that follows you around. And now the Home Secretary this year is threatening to lower the threshold for the recording of those NCHIs, non-crime. And so I thought that was well worth drawing out again as an item on this shopping list that Toby has put together. Yeah.
There was a nice little additional story over Christmas about this, which was, or maybe just after Christmas, whereby John Sopel and the Emily Maitlis crew on their podcast were very dismissive of what had happened to Alison Pearson and were kind of sneering about whether she was deserving of any sympathy for having had a knock at the door from the police, completely failing to display any solidarity with a fellow journalist, which was reminiscent of the Charlie Hebdo response. But then it came to light that there's been an NCHI recorded against a man who gave John Sopel's book to an American, and I can't remember what the title is, but the title was deemed to be offensive to Americans by the American recipient, and then NCHI was recorded against them. I'm laughing, but obviously totally crazy and outrageous. But yes, I like to think that John Sopel probably read that, and I don't know what he would.
It was reported in the Telegraph, I think, and it was Wiltshire Police, if I'm correct. I think I'm correct in thinking it was Wiltshire Police. But yeah, I mean, these NCHIs are coming for us all, aren't they, Jan? That's the problem.
Maybe we should all aim for one as a New Year resolution.
Well, again, that comes back to that solidarity idea.
I can't get us all.
You can't get us all, and it comes back to that pen and fist logo, which I think is a really powerful point, actually, that you made and have observed over the new year. Shall I mention briefly our member stats? So my New Year's Eve, and in fact my New Year's Day, and this is going to sound extremely sad, was spent analysing data. So I stopped briefly at 11:30. I got up from the computer and I looked out the window. I'm lucky enough I can see the London fireworks around the London Eye from the window. I stopped briefly and I carried on working till about 1 a.m.
Without having to pay Sadiq Khan to watch the fireworks.
I just consider them the London fireworks. And I went back to my data set and looked at where exactly we were at 31/12/2024, both in terms of our membership, but also in terms of the types of cases that we've been getting. And it's just an astonishing stat that in the whole of 2024, our active membership, we nearly doubled. So we've existed. This year, we're going to celebrate our 5th anniversary. And in most of our 5th year, we doubled. We rose from active membership of 12,275 at year end 23 to an active membership of 24,279 at year end 2024. It's not quite doubling, it's 97.8%. That's the sort of number where the chief executive turns around and says, this is an art, not a science. Come on, make that 100%, make that double. But sadly, unfortunately, that little voice at the back of my head says, no, the numbers are the numbers. So it is, unfortunately, 97.8, just shy of 100% increase in 1 year, which is astonishing. And most of that, as everybody knows, most of that growth happened post the 4th of July. So that links us back to the point we just made about whether free speech can survive Sir Keir Starmer. On the case management side, we have now had come in to the Free Speech Union around 3,300 cases. That's a huge number. But I remember once someone said to me, I bet you've just had a handful. We'd been running for about 3 years at that point. What have you had? 15, 16? They didn't realize we're talking about thousands of cases of free expression being a concern for people who write into us. And nearly a fifth of the 3,300 cases, so about 640 cases, have been received again in the last 6 months since the new government, or approximately since the new government came in. So again, that uptick in the number of cases, unsurprising given what we've seen. But I mean, digging under those case numbers, Jan, one of the interesting things I saw is that state intervention. So if we'd been speaking at the beginning of 2024, one of the observations about how free expression is now being suppressed, a lot of that is happening actually in the workplace, in the private sector, private schools, private companies. They're all kind of imposing workplace speech codes. And so many of our cases were those. But again, since we've had the new government, state intervention is looming large again in our stats. And where in 2023 it was 10% of our cases, it's now 15%. So again, that is a 50% growth and it's both the number and the proportion, actually, because that's a higher proportion of a higher number. So you've got a sort of double effect there, in effect. Now, state intervention could be non-crime hate incidents, a police visit. It could be prosecution. So we've had more criminal cases as well. But yeah, again, that segment of our work is growing, and it's frightening because we thought it was frightening when the private sector was doing it, but it's a pincer movement now. It's not just the private sector, it's the state sector looming large again. And just that last point I was going to make, Jan, just before, wondered if you had any thoughts, but also we've had more criminal cases that have come in. And they're not just the summer riots, so people going onto Twitter and Facebook and going to prison for things they said on Twitter and Facebook in relation to the summer unrest. It's other things. It is police officers appearing on the doorstep, police officers shutting people down, police officers questioning titles of books, and getting into trouble for those sorts of things. So it's quite widespread again, the growth in the number and the type of criminal cases. So we're tooling up very rapidly. Not that we weren't before. But that is a segment of our work where we really are getting to know the lawyers who we can work with and partner with to support our members on the criminal side as well. That's, I think, is a big theme of 2024 as well. But I don't know. I mean, you don't sit in the data sets as much as I do, Jan. But you hear a lot of things as well as the years gone by. What struck you in 2024 for the Free Speech Union, and kind of how the mood music is evolving?
Yes, well, obviously, I've been at the Free Speech Union since September 2020, so like 6 months in, I think, and the scale is extraordinary. I mean, I think to start with, we were like this little group, forging expertise in a niche area in a way, because it was these instances of of really trying to understand how workplaces were restricting people's free speech, and lots of the time we were concerned about campuses or those kinds of issues. And obviously, NCHIs have been there from very early on.
Yeah.
But I think this is what we've done, and I am kind of in awe of Toby and our case team here, which is that it's only us that has this expertise. We've kind of, because of the insight or the sort of foresight, if you like, that Toby had in setting up the Free Speech Union. Nobody else was interested in this type of speech restriction. There have been, the organisations, the historic organisations about writers and freedom of expression abroad, those kinds of things, but they've never been interested in ordinary people's free speech. So I think that's what we've done, which I think is, just extraordinary. And I think more and more people, once they know about us, it's unarguable that we need to exist, and a tragedy that we have to grow in a way. But it shows how bad things are, but at the same time it does show that we can make a fight of it. And I think our presence as something that isn't just retrospectively fighting on behalf of people when something's already happened, but proactively pushing against legislation, proposing better legislation, or whatever that might be, or just raising awareness of issues. I think I just think it's brilliant that we exist, and I think we're going to have a very, very good 2025, because people can't. There may be grudging respect for the FSU, but I think it's there's an awful lot of people who really, really like us, and people probably have been persuaded to like us over the years, despite their instincts and their political allegiances. And they can't dispute now that we are very, very good at what we do, and that we've brought to light something that otherwise would not be, people wouldn't be aware of it, other than the people that are experiencing it. So I think it's a brilliant thing. And obviously the other additional thing here is that, of course, Toby and Professor Nigel Biggar will be joining the House of Lords, and lots of our members have been incredibly heartened by that, and people online, I noticed, were saying, and under the newspaper articles about it, saying, this is brilliant. I'm so proud to be part of the Free Speech Union, much deserved. And they feel like they have had an input into that, whether that's financially or just kind of being generally supportive of us, spreading the word, coming to our events. They are part of this thing called the Free Speech Union, which I think it's going to be very exciting in the House of Lords, where there's more Lords who will be able to push back and draw out the free speech implications of bad legislation.
Well, you look at how much impact I think Baroness Claire Fox has had since she's been in the House of Lords, just by virtue of being able to stand up and make these points, put them on the record, so that the government can't hide. I mean, they can still do what they want, but it's on the record that, when Claire Fox stands up, she stands up as Baroness Claire Fox, and that makes a difference. Having Toby and Nigel in there as well is a huge deal. It really is. And just going back to one point you made there, Jan, about, there's no other organization like us. I think that's absolutely right. Now, there are organizations that do pieces of what we do. You look at something like the Christian Legal Center. So they'll go into bat legally for Christians who get into trouble by virtue of expressing their right to free speech. And there's Claire Fox's Battle of Ideas that she puts on, and the Academy of Ideas. So there are pieces, but it's that whole range, isn't it? It's that holistic view. When I look at our data and I look at the range of the topics that we cover, and the range of the sanctions, from, as we've spoken about, the state through to employers, and sort of everything in between, you realize, yes, there is nothing that's like us. There's nothing that covers all of those basis and is as kind of as successful and established now. We don't win all our battles, but we win such a significant proportion of them that our voice is of consequence, without a doubt. So it's such great news that Lord Toby of, I don't know, Acton.
Loftus Road, QPR
Yeah,
ground.
that's right. So that is great news. So you briefly want to speak about a farewell event, is that right, Jan? Finally,
Yes, so I'm really pleased that so people may well know that Graham Linehan, the fantastic writer, creator of the IT Crowd, Father Ted, just so many brilliant sitcoms, these sitcoms of Britain in the last 20 odd years. He is going to be going to America to write a sitcom with Andrew Doyle. And the reason for this is because of the terrible treatment he has had at the hands of the British entertainment industry, because he spoke out about the trans issue and has now been vindicated. I mean, utterly vindicated, seen as a crank, cast aside as somebody who was somehow beyond the pale, who'd gone down a rabbit hole, and actually post-cast review, he has been utterly vindicated. And we are able on the 20th of January, Monday the 20th of January in the evening at the Hippodrome in London, we're going to give him a farewell event, a goodbye, send off, good luck, and a thank you, a big thank you, because in doing what he's doing, he has stood up for free speech in practice. And everybody's welcome. You can go on our website and buy tickets and come and get your book signed by Graham, say hello, give him a big pat on the back, and wish him well. This does replace an event that unfortunately we had to cancel, which was the event with Kathleen Stock and the French writer Dora Muto. And due to circumstances that are nothing to do with cancellation, no platforming or anything, just really unfortunate circumstances, we did have to cancel that event. But thankfully, it's given us the chance to do this event for Graham and to have a really fun night, I think. So do go on our website and get tickets to come to that.
That sounds brilliant. But I think that's all that we have for this week. So lovely to see you again, Jan. Happy New Year again to you, and also to our listeners and to our viewers. And we will speak to everybody next week.
Great. Bye-bye.